So if you ever had an issue with your computer and you just rebooted it and it fixed it, you magically realize that everything started working. You could have had many different issues, and for some reason, when you reboot, it the problem is solved. And you've also seen this type of stuff if you are doing IT support, especially a help desk. You tell a user, just go ahead and reboot the computer and let's see what happens. And I'd say about 50% of the time, roughly speaking, it fixes the issue. So why does rebooting the computer fix any of these issues? Well, there are many reasons, and I'm just going to go off the top of my head and just kind of go through the ones that I think are the most likely the reason to fix these issues. All right, so number one, in my opinion, is device drivers. So if you go to the device manager, you'll see that there are some things that haven't been installed. Like in this case, it says other device. This could be anything. And the reason it could be listed like that is simply because you haven't rebooted after you've installed the drivers. So let's say you got a new video card, or some kind of a memory controller, or just any type of extension card that you've installed in your computer, and now it simply looks like this, and you've installed the drivers and it's just sitting there and yet still not working. So until you complete the install, which means that you actually have to reboot the computer, it's not going to complete initializing the hardware and software connection between those two things. So yes, you gotta reboot the computer, because remember, everything starts from the BIOS, meaning at the post, meaning that every time you start a computer, there's a little tiny part of computer itself called BIOS that controls all the pieces of hardware, and it has to know what is controlling that type of hardware after it leaves BIOS. I mean, it never really leaves BIOS, but visually you see your computer boot into Windows, and it has to know how to integrate into the Windows, or how to utilize Windows. And for it to happen, it has to reboot and kind of start from the beginning. You get that, you start from BIOS, your computer's like, oh yeah, you have this hardware. This is all the hardware you have. And when it boots to Windows, it says, oh yeah, you have a driver that actually controls this hardware. And this is why rebooting will fix these. And this is kind of what it looks like here, is when you haven't either installed a new driver or is just waiting for a reboot. But most of the time, to be honest, this just means that the driver hasn't been installed at all. But you can have a situation where you install a driver and everything looks fine. For example, let's look at the display adapter. Like this Intel, but it could be anything. It could be like an NVIDIA GPU or AMD GPU, and it may look like it's installed. And some of them you don't have to install, but or some of them you don't have to reboot, I should say. But it's a good idea to reboot nonetheless. So it may look normal, but when you reboot, it suddenly starts working. Yep, there you go. That's the first one. And second reason, it could be that some software actually needs to wait for it to reinstall or to reboot. Reason behind that is because of integration once more. You see, a lot of times it's an integration issue, and that's when it comes to the technical part of it. For example, if I was to install this mini remote control service for Dameware, Dameware is a remote desktop a program that kind of integrates itself in a sense where it takes control of other computers. Anyways, this might be a too confusing of an example. Let me actually talk about some other software that might be easier to explain. Let's see here. Let's talk about Hyper-V. I'm not sure if I have Hyper-V installed on this computer, but let's see here. When you want to install Hyper-V, Hyper-V is a virtualization software that basically lets you create different versions of Windows virtual operating system within the Windows that you already have. So let's say you have a powerful computer and you want to create another version of your computer, as in Windows, as in a virtual Windows. You can use Hyper-V and other software too. But in order to install Hyper-V, you have to activate it and install it and initialize everything else. Let me see, where is the Hyper-V? Here it is, Hyper-V. So Hyper-V is Microsoft's version of the virtual PC software. So, for example, if you are thinking about servers and cloud computing, they will have a server that's super powerful, has multiple CPUs, tons of RAM. They use these type of tools to create mini virtual servers on that. So for that to happen, you have to reboot. So let's say you're installing this type of software, you have to reboot because that server that you're using has to share its resources, meaning its network adapter, its RAM, its CPU power. And in order for it to initialize again, it has to start from the beginning. So it's a good idea to reboot afterwards. A third reason I can think of is background services. So if you open up Task Manager, you can see that there are a bunch of different background services, background processes, if you will. And you might wonder, well, what are these things? If you're not, familiar with computers, you would be like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. But I'll tell you the reason why you might want to reboot the computer. Here's an example of anti-malware service executable. So this is anti-malware, antivirus, if you will. And this a lot of times needs to reboot your computer to start initializing itself from the beginning of the boot up of your computer. So not necessarily from the BIOS or hardware sense, but from the software. So you can see how we're now getting into the software side and why you would want to reboot your computer in order to make them work properly. This antivirus or anti-malware needs to start running before any other component of the Windows. So anything that's inside of this Windows operating system, this has to be one of the first things that starts up, because it wants to and it needs to start before any viruses or any malware might be on your computer. So if you have a virus that's good at blocking antivirus, you want to start it first. You know what I mean? You want to start your antivirus before your virus starts. And that's the reason why you want to reboot your computer. And it will not work most of the time unless you reboot the computer anyway. So even if you install some kind of third party like McAfee, I don't know, ImmuneNet, that's one I use sometimes. And anyways, you have to reboot in order for antivirus to work properly. And that's very, very crucial. And it also goes for other products. Here it is. Here's Dameware. Dameware is a product that lets me control this computer remotely, although I am using it right now with just a regular RDP, as in a remote desktop protocol for Windows. But this has to be running in the background. So if this is not running in the background, you will not be able, it will not work, right? So it needs to start up, as in on your computer startup. And this usually happens on the startup. See where it is startup here? You can see that there's Dameware right there. And if this doesn't start, it says enabled, it's not going to work. Obviously, you won't be able to remote into this computer using this Dameware remote desktop session. Otherwise, and a lot of times if you see it that it's disabled, rebooting it will re-enable it. Although this here is literally here disabled. You can see you can enable, disable, but you have to make sure that it's enabled to begin with. But this is why the rebooting the computer will fix it, because these services will suddenly stop working. And this could be caused by anything. It could be just some kind of weird change. It could be just opening up a different program. These background services will stop sometimes, and this is why rebooting the computer will fix it. Now, moving on, and this is kind of a segue to it. If you're having, for example, audio issues, let's say you open up your audio here, sound settings, and this ties in with pretty much everything what I talked about earlier. Whether it's hardware initialization or audio initialization, rebooting the computer will allow these things to initialize properly together. So if you have audio issues that are not working, rebooting the computer, chances are will fix it. But that's also related to the type of audio that you use. If you're using regular type of audio connectors, those jacks that you plug into the front of your computer. You know, those 3.5 millimeter ones, you have one separate for speakers and one separate for microphone. May not necessarily be applicable to that because that's completely separate from, for example, USB. And USBs are notorious for not working unless you reboot the computer. So you can go ahead and try this on your own, especially with USB thumb drives and USB headsets, audio headsets. You would plug it into one and then it suddenly stopped working. So what happened? Well, the computer kind of associates your hardware, as in your headset or your USB thumb drive, with that USB that you just plugged it in. So he wants to keep using that to keep it separate from anything else that might be plugged in. So he wants to memorize that while the computer is running, and then suddenly it stops working, and then naturally the first thing you do is try to plug it into a different USB. So once you do that, it doesn't work sometimes because it's trying to use something that Windows simply is not wanting it to use. It's basically saying, well, you use this other one, so I want you to keep using this first USB just to keep things separate and organized. And that necessarily, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that per se, but it will not let go unless you reboot the computer. And this is why audio issues and memory stick issues will be resolved half the time once you reboot the computer. It could also be your cell phone. Like if you try to plug in your cell phone and try to connect to it, and you have to go in and select it to share, whatever. Whatever, I should be more specific. Like, if you want to tether it, or if you want to, move media files between back and forth, your cell phone may not work, and then you try a different USB. Anyways, 50% of the time rebooting the computer will fix this, because computer itself will reset itself. Microsoft itself will reset itself, and then it'll suddenly say, oh, okay, now that I've rebooted, I can refresh these USB devices once more, starting from the BIOS and on up, and now I can associate anything new that's being plugged into that USB. So there you go. That's the part of that. All right. So let's move on and let's go back to our task manager and see what else can be causing problems with your computer, and rebooting it simply will fix the problem. Another is, and I know I'm going back and forth because I'm doing everything off the top of my head. I don't have a script or anything. This is just me sharing my knowledge, if you will. And another reason is to run out of resources. So you can see here in Task Manager of what kind of CPU I have here, what kind of memory I have, what kind of disk, what kind of Ethernet, and what kind of GPU I have. Anytime you run out of resources, meaning that you maximize your CPU. Let's say this CPU is running at 100%. It says here it's only being used 1 to 2%. If this ever goes to 100% and it stays there, that means that there's something in the background here that's using up all the CPU. If you sort here, you can see all the percentages of things that are using the CPU. There might be something in the background that's using 100% of it. The computer starts running slow. You can't do anything else because your computer is already being used at 100% its capacity. So naturally rebooting the computer will fix it, because it will kill all of these executable or these programs that are running in the background, programs, services, anything that's running in the background will stop working. It would refresh itself, and then your computer works because you rebooted it. Now it's suddenly not slow anymore. That's because you freed it up from whatever was using up a lot of CPU. Most of the time I've seen things using up a lot of CPU is anti-malware or antivirus in the background, which is normal. But it shouldn't be using 100% all the time. It should be just scheduled occasionally and should be running in real time in the background, just kind of using a little bit, just like it is here. And another reason you could have a process that's running at 100%, you could have a virus. So you may temporarily fix the issue, but if you don't remove the virus that's taking up hundreds of CPU, then you're not going to fix the problem. It'll just be a temporary fix by rebooting it. So keep that in mind. Kind of if you look through the processes here, and if it looks sketchy, as in like, what is this thing? I've never heard of this. You can see what it is by simply like, here it is. If you right click it and then you click open file location, you can see, well, what is this? What is this? And you can see that since we clicked on anti-malware service executable and it opened up a folder where it's installed, you can see that this is actually Windows Defender and it's installed on your computer. You know what Windows Defender, it's simply antivirus software. Here is its executable and it works fine. No problem whatsoever. But if you open it up and it's like, what is this? Then you might have a virus, you know. In that case, it's good to reboot anyways, because remember we talked about rebooting and making sure that anti-malware can start first before the virus. So again, same thing can be applied to memory. You see, I only have 3.9 gigabytes or 4 gigs, if you will, of RAM on this computer, and this is just a workstation that I have. It's a plain computer that I have sitting around that I use for these type of videos for demonstration purposes. And you can see that I've already used 60%, and this is just computer running. It's not even open up program. Now imagine if I start to open up programs, it's going to start. It's going to start to fill up quickly. See, I'm going to try to open up some things. Let's see where we at right now. See, we're already at 74%, and I now only opened up Outlook and and Edge, and you can imagine, you know, anything that's bigger than that, it will fill up quickly, and then you would run at 100% memory. And it was more of a problem before in the past where computers were using a magnetic type of hard drives. The reason I'm talking about hard drives at this point is because once you run out of RAM, your computer starts to use paged memory, if you will, or it's called virtual memory as well. So you can find that if you go to your computer properties and advanced system settings, and then you go to, where is it? It's been a while since I've actually gone to it. It's probably here. I'm just kind of blind to see it. Performance, here we go. It's the first tab. So, and if you go to advanced, you can see the virtual memory. So in this computer, if my computer runs out of RAM, it switches over to using virtual memory, which for this computer is set to 704 megabytes. You can change that. But the problem is it's slow. It's very, very slow. It's not nowhere close to the speed of RAM. And it was a problem before. A lot of times it's a problem now too, but not as much as it was when magnetic hard drives were used. Because remember, they have to spin up and it's slow. Nowadays, we're using solid state drives, which are pretty fast, so it's not as noticeable, but your like stuff like video games and anything that requires actual RAM, the process will be affected by that quite a bit. So if you are running at 100% RAM, rebooting the computer will fix it because it will close these programs, but it will be a temporary solution. So that's another reason why you would want. So moving on, and you can see the same kind of applies to, let's see here. Well, I was going to say Ethernet, which can be the case. Ethernet being your local connection to the internet. So if you're, you know, downloading something and it's using up all your bandwidth, of course, if you reboot, it's going to kill that program, and then suddenly your internet is going to start going faster because you've killed the process that's using up all your, which could be a virus as well. You could be a virus. If you go to Task Manager and scroll over, you can see which program is using and how much is using of your network as well. Just the same way you can scroll and look at the CPU, you can look at the network. You can see that remote desktop here is using, you know, 0.1 megabits per second. That's because I'm remoting into it. So that's at local network. So another reason you might want to reboot your computer is when there's no connection. So let's say you have no internet, in which case the issue may not be with the computer itself technically. So if you have a router that's been that lost power, for example, let's say the power went out in your home and then it is not able to assign an IP address to your computer. Sometimes you have to reboot the computer to send the signal to the router that there's a new component on the network, in which case we'll assign a new IP address to your computer. So it's not necessarily your computer that is broken, but maybe the router needs to realize that there is a new network device attached, so you have to reboot the router, which will fix the issue. Anyways, there are so many other issues that can fix just by rebooting. This type of thinking, you can apply it to anything. Just like we talked about here, CPU, memory, and Ethernet, you can apply the same type of thinking to GPU. So you see how I'm kind of going with this. I want you to start thinking about on how these things are happening in the background and why rebooting a computer will resolve these things half the time, 50% of the time. In my opinion, this is just me saying it. Uh, but it resolves these issues. We've all seen this, and these are the reasons. I don't want you to think that, well, there was nothing wrong with the computer to begin with, because there might be something wrong with the computer to begin with. And this is something you have to investigate, and it's based off of things that I just showed you. Sure, if it's a simple issue and you kind of know that the reason why rebooting the computer fixed it, then you just kind of leave it at that. Let's say there's a USB issue, something like that. You reboot it, and that's what the problem was. That's what fixed it. Move on. But if the issue comes back right away or shortly, that means you have to look into it. And rebooting a computer as a temporary solution is not a solution. I might have missed some other things that you guys might be aware of. I mean, I've been working IT and tech support for a long, long time, and there are so many different things. I'm sure I've seen some bizarre things that I probably can't remember right now, but these are some of the general things that could be the reason why rebooting the computer fixes it. People say, "Oh, you just reboot the computer. Doing IT is easy." Well, maybe half the time in these specific situations. But most of the other time, if you're doing some serious IT support, eh, you know, it's not as easy as I wish. I wish it was as easy. But, you know, me saying the 50% is being very generous. It's more like, 20%, I'd say. All right, guys. I hope you like this video. Uh, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just hope you like it. Let me know in the comments if you have any other reason, or if you've seen it, another reason why rebooting the computer would fix it. All right, guys, take care. You have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.